Hey everyone, it's Dave. We're here for part 3 of my series, upgrading the suspension on my 1990 Miata. Today we're installing these IL Motorsport bushings in all 4 corners of the suspension. They're a slight upgrade over the stock bushings that are now worn out after 35 years. They're still rubber bushings, but they're a little bit firmer and promise to improve the performance. So let's get started. You're watching Dave's Auto DIY. So this job is taking me several months, but thank goodness it's the winter, so my car has been off the road anyway, but it has proven to be a lot more difficult than I expected. So I'm going to edit this into one continuous series, but let me tell you, it hasn't been continuous at all, but through the magic of editing and YouTube, it'll look like one easy job. So the upper rear has 3 bolts holding on. They're all 14 millimeter. There's 1 on the outside here and 2 on the inside, both ends on the inside. They're all 14 millimeters. We'll start with that. I found putting a jack under the control arm to take a little bit of the weight off helped take some of the pressure off to be able to bang out the bolts. With the 3 bolts out, you should be able to wiggle it loose and remove the upper control arm. Before I show you how I remove the bushings on this upper control arm, let me show you the failed techniques and tools I used on the opposite side of the vehicle. The first technique I used was this 3-jaw clamp, and I was able to attach the 3 jaws around a bushing, use this threaded piece here to drive the bushing out, and then put another bushing in and drive it in. This kind of did work. I'm sure you can find other YouTubers that can show you how to use this technique. When I got to the larger bushings, this was not strong enough. I ended up destroying the threads, using my impact gun on this, just rattled all the bolts apart. I rebuilt it a dozen times. Unfortunately, I don't have any video of that, but probably the YouTube police wouldn't allow all the language as I was doing that job anyway. So next, I went to another technique I found on YouTube using threaded rod. It was also a fail. This is an example of one of the rods. I built it up with some nuts and some washers. You can find examples on the internet of that too. Trying to get the larger bushings out using this technique, I ended up shearing the threaded rod several times. This is an example of how it sheared on an angle there, as there was so much torsion on the threaded rod that it just snapped. So after the difficulty trying to use a gear puller or the threaded rod technique, I purchased this C-clamp, which is part of a kit for a ball joint removal tool. By putting a receiver cup on the end of the bushing, you can push the bushing right through into the receiver cup to get it out. Unfortunately, while working on the lower control arm on the opposite side, I managed to bend the C-clamp such that nothing was aligned. Everything was crooked, making it very awkward to try to get the bushing out. But I struggled through, used heat from my heat gun, and was able to get all 3 bushings out from the upper control arm. Then I gave it a bit of a cleaning to clean some of the rust off, including inside the bushing opening so that the new bushings would be able to fit in a little easier. I cleaned up the control arm and gave everything a coat of rust paint. Installing the bushings with this bent C-clamp was such a pain in the neck that I'm not going to show you too much. Hopefully I've got much better examples to show you on the lower control arm when I use the new C-clamp that I've purchased that is straight. Alright, so we have the the two bushings in the control arm, the one in the top of the knuckle, back in the top control arm. We will try to push this back in place. Put the bolt back through. I'll just tighten these up loosely for now because we'll have to wait to do the final torquing on these once the car has weight on the suspension. So now we'll tackle the rear lower control arm. So there are 5 bolts to remove the lower control arm at the rear. There is a 17 millimeter nut on the long bolt on the outside end of the control arm. The head of the bolt is a 21 millimeter. There's a 17 millimeter bolt holding in the bottom of the shock. There's a 14 millimeter on the end link, and there are 17 millimeters, one on each side of these alignment bolts. We'll get those off, and I have put a little scratch mark where the alignment plates are currently. I'm going to be throwing out these bolts. These are a wear item. I bought new ones, but nevertheless, I've got a starting point anyway of where to line up the new bolts when I install them. I'll start with the easy one. I've had this one off before. The 14 millimeter on the bottom of the end link. The next easiest should be the lower shock bolt because I've had this one off recently too. Oh yeah. Now I'll try to get the inner bolts out. These ones will be tight. These ones probably have never been off. Oh, it came. Now we'll tackle the 17 millimeter nut on the end of the long bolt. Now, the 21 millimeter head on the bolt still won't spin. It's a very long bolt, and in the middle section can get rusted up and seized. The way I found I needed to get it out was use a 2-foot breaker bar with another 2-foot extension on it, work the bolt gently as I could, back and forth, to get it loose enough that my impact gun could then be used to spin it, try to get some of that rust off. And finally, I could tap it out from the other side. Then I removed my jack, put a block of wood under the knuckle to kind of support the suspension while I worked loose the lower control arm, pulled it out, cleaned it up a bit, gave it a coat of paint, and moved on to the bushings. So I've moved inside. It's freezing cold in my garage today. It's minus 24 Celsius and my garage is not heated. So I'm going to remove these bushings in the lower rear control arm inside. This is attempt 4. I've purchased a new ball joint press kit. This one isn't bent. I'm not going to use an impact gun on it. I'm just going to use a ratchet rather than an impact gun so I don't overstress the clamp. I've got one of the receiver cups that is about the same size as the metal case for the bushing on here. I'm going to apply some heat with the heat gun to get it a little bit softer, and we will just push the bushing out into the cup. Okay. All right, hopefully 4th time's the charm. You can see it pushing the bushing out. This is one of the larger bushings, one of the ones I had a lot of difficulty with on the other side. But it seems to be working. I also tried using a 1 5/8 inch piece of exhaust pipe. That's about the right size, but I found it to be too soft and just would bend. Well, I'm twisting here. I'm going to have to take it off and get everything recentered here before continuing. pull it out the rest of the way by hand. Back that off. The cup. And here we go. One very old used bushing. So I'm working on the inner end now of the control arm. None of these receiver cups were small enough for me to fit the clamp and a receiver cup in between the two sides. So I went back to my 1 5/8 inch exhaust tube and I cut it shorter. And then I used an X-Acto knife to cut off the lip edge so the exhaust tube would fit nicely onto the end. And I'm hoping that'll work to push this bushing through. And we got the bushing out. There it is. All right, I've already put 3 in. I'll show you how I do it on the last one here. I tell you what, it makes a big difference having the right tool and getting the technique right. I put a little bit of soap on the bush, and I'm going to put some soap inside the sleeve for it here to lubricate it up. This is going to dry out over time and not stay there so that it won't slip. And I will slip the end in just to get it started. Then I will use the proper tool, which is this C-clamp. Now that I know, this was so hard, I wrecked the gear puller trying to do this. I snapped 3/8 inch threaded rods multiple times trying to do this before. I wrecked the end of the bushing and had to buy another set. Eventually, I bought another one of these clamps and used an impact gun on it. That was a mistake because I bent the clamp itself. I ended up, to tell you the truth, I cheated. I took it to a mechanic to finish putting in the bush on the opposite side. But now that I know the trick, I'm just going to do this. I don't even need a sleeve on the other side here for it to put pushed into, because the clamp itself has an opening, so the end of the bushing will slide out when it comes to the other side. With the soap, it's going in pretty easily. I'll put a little bit more on just to make sure it doesn't dry out on me while I'm doing the job. And I'll push it in until the lip is nice and tight up against the metal. I think that should do it. Back it off now. There. And it's in. So to reinstall, it took a little bit of tapping with my rubber mallet to get the holes for the inner end to line up properly. Okay. So the lower inner end of the lower control arms are put on with these camber bolts, which adjust the alignment. These are a wear item. I've bought new ones from the local Mazda dealer. I'll put the part number in the description. I'd recommend buying new bolts rather than trying to use the old bolts. I understand that these can wear out and not stay firmly attached, and your car will go out of alignment. So I'd recommend buying new bolts. Once you get the inner bolts in just loose and hand tight, I'm using a jack to line up the outer side enough to get the bolt lined up with the bottom of the knuckle for the outer side. Now you can go ahead and put the bolt back through the bottom of the end link, put the washer back on, and the nut on hand tight. So if you're lucky at this point, you can put through the 17mm lower shock bolt and it'll catch into the nut on the other side. If you're unlucky, the little clips holding the nut on the other side break off like it did on the other side of the car. If that happens to you, I found a trick on how to get the nut in place. Go back and watch part 2 of my video where I solved that problem. So I'm going to clean up some of the rust off this long bolt and lubricate it before trying to slide it back through. And I'll clean up the threads a bit too before trying to reinstall it. It took several attempts of raising and lowering the jack to get it to line up well, but eventually I was able to get the long bolt through and the nut on hand tight. Now that everything's in, you can jack up the car some more and lower the car onto a jack stand on the suspension so that the full weight of the vehicle is on the suspension before you do the final torquing. As you turn the inner bolts, you'll see the suspension move in and out. That's how you do an alignment. Do your best to get the little positioners lined up with the scratches you made earlier, but you still will have to take it for a four-wheel alignment. So now moving around to the front, the first thing you'll have to do is, of course, jack up your car, remove the under tray with the 312 10mm bolts that connect the under tray, and come into the engine compartment and remove the 2 bolts that hold on the shock. Do not remove the center bolt on the shock. We'll pull out the whole coil over assembly as one unit, so you only have to remove these 2 bolts at the side. So we're going to start with the inner part of the upper control arm. There is a 19mm long bolt that runs through, and there's a nut. Make sure you remember which, there's a spacer here, there's a spacer and washer on the rear side. Remember where these go. This can be very tight to get off. Fortunately, I've had it off recently, so it shouldn't be too difficult for me. And the other thing you're going to need to do to slide that out is back off the rear bolt that connects the sway bar bracket, the 12mm. You have to back it out just so there's enough space here to slide this long bolt through. It's very awkward to get to this rear 21mm. I found with my smaller ratchet, with a pipe on the ratchet, I can get it off. There's a bracket there for the brake line that's in exactly the wrong spot to easily access that bolt. Once you get that nut off, you can slide the bolt out through the front, through the space that you opened up by loosening off that bolt on the sway bar bracket. I'll just put the spacers back on in the way they came off so you can more easily, you don't forget which way to put it back together. Then we'll take out the lower bolt on the end link. It's a 14mm, and the 17mm lower shock bolt. Now with that end link off and the lower shock bolt off, we should be able to push down on the suspension enough that we can pull down on the shock and get it out of the vehicle. And set that to the side. Next, I'm going to get the brake caliper out of the way, removing the 17 millimeter bolt that holds on the caliper at the top and the 14 millimeter at the bottom. And I'll remove the two 14 millimeters that hold the brake bracket to the steering knuckle. There's one there and one there. It was really stuck on there, so I had to give it a good whack to get the caliper off. I'm just going to leave it supported. I put it's a flower pot. You can hang it up with a rope or something. You just don't want to leave it with the weight hanging on the brake line. And I can remove the caliper bracket. Now to get the upper ball joint off, there is a cotter pin that runs through this castle nut. I'll have to straighten that out and pull this cotter pin out and then take off this loosen off this castle nut. So this is a ball joint remover tool. It's this clamp thing, and you screw down the bolt to push on the bolt. I've got the castle nut upside down, so it's pushing on the castle nut, and you jam it in between the steering knuckle and the control arm, and we're trying to push this bolt out through the steering knuckle. So as I tighten this up, it should pop that one off. And I've got the nut on there so it won't fly off when it comes loose. Pop! Came off. Now you can just back off that castle nut and it comes off. So now that the upper control arm is off, it's a good chance to look at that ball joint, see if it's got any excess play in it. This one feels okay. The rubber bellows around it is intact. Doesn't seem to be leaking. It's not loose in any way, so I think I'm going to get away with reusing that. So moving on to the outer tie rod end, it's got a castle nut, cotter pin, the same as the upper ball joint. You can see my ball joint, though, it was leaking lots of oil, so I've purchased new tie rod ends. And since I had already purchased new tie rod ends, I decided not to use the ball joint removal tool. I just took off that castle nut and hammered on that bolt until it came loose. Fortunately, that may have been a mistake, as you'll learn later on the lower ball joint. And the last things to get the steering knuckle off is there is a 17 millimeter through bolt on the lower ball joint and another one tucked in there, which is below where the shock mounts. And we'll be able to remove the lower ball joint with the steering knuckle. And then I'll take a look to see if it looks like it's in good shape. That way I might not have to remove the ball joint from the steering knuckle. And there it's out. So now that I've got it off, the ball joint's free and everything, but I can feel a little bit of play up and down in the ball joint, the lower ball joint. So I don't have one of these. I'm going to go ahead and order a new one. No point doing all this work and putting it back together with a bad lower ball joint. Outer tie rod threads on to the inner tie rod, and this nut is a lock nut to hold it in place. This is all seized up. This is a 1990. That's 35 years ago, so no wonder it's seized up. And this is what you need to have motion on to be able to do a steering alignment. So I bought the inner tie rod, a new one as well. I'm going to remove the bellows. There's a little clip here, and then there is a wire holding the inner end of the bellows. I'll pull the bellows back to expose the nut that attaches the inner end of the tie rod. Put a bit of WD-40 on here. Try to slide the bellows down the tie rod. There we go. That exposes the inner end of the tie rod. You'll see this is the nut that has to come off to take the inner tie rod off the steering rack, and it's got this washer that's bent down around this square nut. So you have to go around each of the four sides and kind of chisel back this washer that is bent over so you can get an adjustable wrench on here to remove it. Thread it out of this steering rack. And finally, the inner side of the lower control arm, the front and rear, are attached with these 17mm alignment bolts. Mine are really seized on here. It was difficult to get them off, but took them off, and I will be reinstalling new ones when complete. So I'm ready to do the front. I've already cleaned them up, gave them a coat of rust paint. I'm not going to show you the whole ordeal, but there's just a few tips that I learned while doing the other side. One is you have to cut off with a knife, a sharp knife, the lip, the rubber lip on this large bushing on the lower control arm, and the lip on both of the upper control arm. That's so when you put your metal cup there, it'll sit flush up against the metal, and you can push what's left of the bushing out through. The other thing I learned is maybe I used the wrong thing on the other bushings where I used dish soap. I've learned probably I should have just used a soapy solution, water solution. This is just some cleaner. The soap I've read, maybe leaves a little bit too much residue. Oh well, it'll dry up. I'm sure it'll be okay. The other thing you might be wondering is why I chose IL Motorsport rubber bushings at all. Poly bushings are easier to install. Poly bushings are probably better for track performance. But I have a street car. Rubber bushings are better for NVH, noise, vibration, and harshness. So they're a bit more comfortable for street use. So these are the IL Motorsport bushings are a rubber bushing. They're a little bit harder than the stock bushings, so they'll give a little bit of performance, but not so much as poly bushings. And they won't squeak. Poly bushings can develop squeaks over time. You might have to lubricate them. This is a horrible job. I never want to take these out and have to lubricate them. So rubber bushings makes a lot of sense for me. So my lower ball joint has arrived, so it's time to put everything back together. I'm going to try to put it together in an order where there's some method to the madness. So I'm starting with the inner bolts on the lower control arm. Again, I'm using new bolts and nuts and cam plates here. I will just get tight because we won't want to torque these until there's weight on the suspension. So I've got my new inner tie rod. The new inner tie rod, though, did not come with the washer that fits on to the end, and you kind of smash it around the square nut to prevent it from turning. And there's some little tabs on it that fit into a slot on the steering rack. So I took the one off the old inner tie rod, banged it flat with a hammer, and I'll use this. It also didn't come with the little rubber bellows that covers the ball joint on the inside. So I took the one off the old type because it's in good condition, and this is a rubber bellows that goes underneath the other rubber bellows, so I'm not sure how important it is, but I took the one off the old one and I'll slip it over the end. I'm going to slip it over once I attach it. Here's the nut. You can see there's these two little tabs. Make sure those two little tabs are pointed towards the car so that they catch in the groove on the steering rack. So I've just threaded it into the The nut is in there. The washer is in there with the tabs into the groove so it won't spin. And I'll finish tightening it up with just an adjustable wrench. Well, that's going loose. Tightens the other way. Then I did my best to stake that washer back around the square bolt to prevent it from spinning. So this bellows I bought to replace the old one. The one on the other side was cracked. This one was not cracked on this side, but I've decided to buy a new one anyway. Wasn't quite the right diameter to fit over the steering rack, so I found I need to cut off the last row of bellows here to be able to slide it over and get it into this little notch and then tie it on with a tie wrap. Next, I'll put the long bolt through that front thread. Take the washer off first. Okay. The spacers on both sides, washer nut on there. I noticed on the other side, I thought I did something wrong because it could move side to side before I tightened it up. But once you tighten it up, the upper control arm is on there solid. Won't slide back and forth anymore. Still not torqued up. I won't be torquing that one up until we get some weight on the suspension, but we can put 20 foot-pounds back on the sway bar bolt that we loosened off to make way for that long bolt. Here's my new lower ball joint, the part number if you're interested. I will install that in the lower control arm. Both the inner bolt that's tucked underneath the shock mount and the through bolt on the lower ball joint, both are torqued up to 54 to 68 foot-pounds. Then you can put the steering knuckle back over the lower ball joint, tighten it up to 43 to 57 foot-pounds, and don't forget to reinstall a cotter pin to hold it in place. So I'm almost there. I've put a jack stand under the lower control arm so I can lift things into place. I've lowered my shock down through the opening in the upper control arm. I've just loosely attached the lower bolt. I'll have to torque that up once there's weight on the suspension. Now I'm going to use the jack to slowly lift it up, making sure the top bolts on the shock go through the holes in the top there, and get it high enough so I can get a bolt through the end link. Actually, one more thing I'm going to line up while I'm doing this too is I'm going to get the upper ball joint to line up as well. See if I can get this bolt through the end link. Put the washer back on, and the nut, again, that's another one, can't be torqued up yet. And to get the castle nut onto that upper ball joint, this upper ball joint is only 22 to 32 foot-pounds. Okay, and I'll put a cotter pin through this one as well. So this was a bit of a mistake. I should have measured the length of the old tie rod, including the tie rod end, before cutting it. Now I don't know how far to screw on the outer tie rod end here to have the steering in alignment. So what I'm going to do is trust that it's about the same as the other side. I did measure the other side, so I'll make this entire tie rod about as long as the other side. I'll try to get the steering wheel straight. I'll try to get it a little fairly straight, and it'll have to do until I take it in for an alignment, and they'll have to adjust the steering. So I'll get it in there straight, and then this lock nut will lock it in place when I get it to approximately the right length. This one goes to 22 to 32 foot-pounds. There we go. Then you can slide back on the brake disc, clean it up with a little bit of brake cleaner, and put back on the brake caliper holder. Then I turned the wheel all the way to the right so I could get easier access to the bracket bolts and tighten them down to 36 to 51 foot-pounds. Then I reinstalled the little clips to hold the pads in place. Mine doesn't have little springs that hold the pads apart like yours might. Somebody must have removed them in the past. I understand they're not very critical, so I'm not too worried. So before putting the caliper back on, or the piston back on, you gotta press it back in. I don't have a piston press, so I'm using this high-tech device called a mouse trap, just something thin and wood so I don't damage the piston. And I'm going to squeeze it on with a regular old C-clamp. There, that's all the way in. Pull off the C-clamp. And there you go. The piston is fully plunged. So now I can slide the caliper back over the pads. Cleaned up this slider pin a little bit, put some more grease on it. Slide it in the bottom. This is the smaller of the two. And the bigger of the two fits in the top. And now I will just tighten up these two 58 to 65 foot-pounds. Now I've raised the car back up and lowered it onto a jack stand under the suspension to take all the weight, so I can go back and torque up all those that need weight on the suspension, starting with the long bolt on the upper control arm. 87 to 101 foot-pounds. There we go. Lower bolt on the end link, 27 to 40 pounds. And 54 to 69 pounds on the lower shock bolt. And the front lower control arm bolt, the alignment bolt, the torque spec is 69 to 83, 61 to 76 foot-pounds on the rear. Just try to do your best to try to get those little alignment markings roughly where they were when you took it off, but don't worry if they aren't, because you're going to have to take it to get it aligned after working on the suspension. Then finally, we'll come back around to the top. Could have tightened up these two shock nuts to 22 to 27 foot-pounds earlier. You don't have to have the weight on the suspension for these, but it was just convenient to do it last because I had to lower the lift to get to them. Well, I did it. Thunder has a full new suspension, new shocks and springs, new sway bars, and now new suspension bushings. All she needs now is a full four-wheel alignment so I can do a proper test drive, and I promise I'll come back and post how it all turns out after that test drive. Now I can't say it was easy, so I sure hope it was worth it. And I also hope that you learned something. I hope you hit subscribe, and I hope to see you next time on Dave's Auto DIY.